Right now, at this very second, the world owes $348 trillion. Not billion, trillion. That number is so large that if you stacked that many dollar bills on top of each other, the pile would reach the sun and come back 47 times. Every man, woman, and child on this planet, from a baby born 10 minutes ago in Tokyo to a farmer in rural Kenya, owes roughly $43,000. And nobody remembers signing up for this. So how did the entire planet end up broke? Who do we owe all this money to, and what happens when nobody can pay it back? To understand how we got here, we need to go back to a time before countries could just print money whenever they wanted. For most of human history, money was simple. If a king wanted to buy something, he paid with gold or silver, real, physical metal you could hold in your hand. And if a government wanted to spend more than it had, tough luck. You can't just invent gold out of thin air. This kept governments honest, or at least, it kept them broke in a predictable way. Then came World War II. The entire planet was in ruins. Europe was flattened. Japan was devastated. And sitting on top of the wreckage, untouched, was the United States, holding 3/4 of all the gold on Earth. So in 1944, leaders from 44 countries gathered at a hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire, a place called Bretton Woods, and they made a deal that would reshape the entire global economy. Here's how it worked. Every country would peg their currency to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be pegged to gold, $35 for 1 ounce. So the dollar was basically as good as gold, and if any country ever got nervous, they could walk up to America's door, hand over their dollars, and get real gold back. Simple, clean, trustworthy. And for about 25 years, it actually worked. But here's where things get weird. America started spending money it didn't have. The Vietnam War was burning through cash. New welfare programs were expanding. And the government kept printing more and more dollars to pay for all of it. The problem other countries noticed. France looked at how many dollars were floating around the world and said, wait a minute, there's no way America has enough gold to back all of this. So France literally sent a warship to New York to collect its gold. Other countries started lining up to do the same thing. It was a bank run, but on the United States of America. So on August 15, 1971, President Nixon went on national television and made an announcement that changed the world forever. He said America would no longer exchange dollars for gold. He called it temporary. It wasn't. With one speech, money was no longer tied to anything physical. The dollar, and by extension every currency on Earth, became what economists call fiat money. Its value was based on one thing and one thing only: trust. Trust that the government wouldn't go crazy with the printing press. And for a while, that trust held. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Once money was no longer tied to gold, governments discovered something intoxicating. They could borrow, almost without limits. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a credit card with no spending limit and no due date. The bank just asks you to pay a little bit of interest each month. How disciplined would you be? That's exactly what happened to every government on Earth. In the year 2000, total global government debt was about $20 trillion. That sounds like a lot, but by 2008, it had nearly doubled. And that was before things got really bad. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, banks were collapsing, people were losing their homes, and the stock market was in free fall. Governments around the world did the only thing they knew how to do. They borrowed more money. The United States alone pumped over $700 billion into bailing out banks. The United Kingdom borrowed hundreds of billions. Every major economy on Earth opened the floodgates. And here's the thing. The crisis ended. The economy recovered. But the debt? The debt never went away. Nobody paid it back. They just rolled it over, borrowed more, and kept going. Now here's where the story takes its darkest turn. In early 2020, a virus shut down the entire world. And governments faced an impossible choice: let their economies collapse, or borrow so much money that future generations would be paying it off for decades. They chose the borrowing. The United States alone spent over $5 trillion on pandemic relief. Europe spent trillions more. Japan, India, Brazil. Every country on Earth was writing checks it couldn't cash. In a single year, global government debt jumped from around $75 trillion to almost $90 trillion. It was the fastest accumulation of debt in the history of civilization. But politicians told us not to worry. Interest rates were basically zero. Borrowing was essentially free. It was like getting a mortgage with no interest payments. Who wouldn't take that deal? But cheap debt is like quicksand. It feels fine when you step in. The problem starts when you try to get out. And that brings us to the trap that almost nobody is talking about. When interest rates started rising in 2022 and 2023, suddenly all that free debt wasn't free anymore. Think of it this way. Imagine you borrowed $1 million at 1% interest. Your payment is $10,000 a year. Totally manageable. Now imagine that interest rate jumps to 5%. Same debt, but now you owe $50,000 a year. That's exactly what happened to the United States. In 2020, America was paying about $345 billion a year in interest on its debt. By 2025, that number exploded to nearly $1 trillion. Let me say that again. America now spends more money on interest payments, not paying off the debt, just the interest, than it spends on its entire military. More than the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, and every military base on Earth combined. The country that spends more on defense than the next 10 countries put together is now spending even more just on the interest charges of its credit card bill. And America isn't even the worst example. Japan has government debt worth over 230% of its entire economy. That's like earning $50,000 a year and owing $115,000 on your credit card. Italy, Greece, France, the United Kingdom. They're all drowning. China's debt has exploded from practically nothing in the year 2000 to nearly $19 trillion. Every major economy on Earth is running on borrowed time, literally. So the obvious question is, who do we owe all this money to? If every country is in debt, who's the lender? And this is where it gets really mind-bending. Countries mostly owe the money to themselves. Governments borrow by selling things called bonds. And who buys those bonds? Their own citizens, their own banks, their own pension funds. Your retirement savings are probably lending money to your government right now, without you even knowing it. But a huge chunk is also owed to foreign countries. China holds over $700 billion of American debt. Japan holds even more. And America owes money to dozens of other nations too. It's like a giant circle of IOUs, where everyone owes everyone else, and nobody has the cash to settle up. Now here's the question that keeps economists up at night. Can this go on forever? There are two schools of thought, and they couldn't be more different. One group says, yes, relax, this is fine. Governments aren't like households. They can print their own currency. They can never technically go broke, because they can always create more money to pay their bills. The other group says that's like saying you can keep writing checks, as long as nobody checks your bank account. Eventually, they argue, the math catches up. Interest payments eat more and more of the budget. Governments have to choose between paying interest on old debt or funding hospitals, schools, and roads. Taxes go up. Services go down. And if confidence ever cracks, if the bond market ever says, we don't trust you anymore, the whole thing unravels fast. We've seen it happen. Argentina has defaulted on its debt 9 times. Greece nearly collapsed in 2012. Sri Lanka ran out of money in 2022 and couldn't even buy fuel. Lebanon's currency lost 98% of its value. These aren't ancient history. These are recent events. And the scariest part? The biggest borrowers haven't even started feeling the real pain yet. Remember, a massive wave of debt is coming due. Emerging markets alone face over $9 trillion in debt that needs to be refinanced in 2026. Advanced economies are staring at over $20 trillion in maturing bonds and loans. That means governments will need to borrow enormous amounts of new money just to pay off the old money they borrowed. It's like taking out a new credit card to pay off your old credit card. And each time they do it, the interest rate might be higher than the last time. This is what economists call a debt spiral. When you borrow money to pay interest on the money you already borrowed, and each cycle makes the next one worse. So what happens next? Nobody knows for certain. Maybe governments will grow their way out of it. If economies boom fast enough, the debt shrinks relative to everything else. The way a mortgage feels smaller after 20 years of raises. Maybe technology and artificial intelligence will supercharge productivity so much that tax revenues surge. Or maybe inflation does the dirty work. If prices double, your debt stays the same number. That's the sneaky way governments have always reduced their debts, by quietly making your money worth less. But there's a darker possibility too, one where interest payments consume so much of government budgets that countries can't invest in their future, where they can't fund infrastructure, education, or innovation, where an entire generation inherits a bill they didn't run up for a party they weren't invited to. $348 trillion. That's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's a promise made by the people who came before us. The question isn't whether the world can keep borrowing. It's whether the world can ever stop.